This is a topic that's developing on me, and it's growing quickly into, I think an understanding that perhaps as a pastor, but also as a person. So what I wrote down as a synopsis is basically, this is going to be a little exploration, and you can read the synopsis yourself. Again, there's quite a bit here, so I will try to pace myself well. We have tell me what exactly is the time I'm quitting here? It is 20 to 11 now? 11:30, and then we have 10 minutes or so for, okay. So the background of this topic is my pastoral work. Here, just a couple of quotes of people. I'm not going to read them all. I'm a very tough person, and I'm rude to people. Someone shared to me as I was counseling. I'm very tough and rude, so people watch what they say to me. That's how I learned to protect myself from being even more shamed by what people say. Yeah? You have rude kids, mouthy kids, or sometimes adults. My whole life is shameful. I'm ashamed about how I look, how I sound, how I laugh, how I behave. There's not anything I am not ashamed about. I now even have stuffed up parenting as I continue to shame my own kids. Honest admission, but pretty sad one too. My husband says he loves me. Yeah, right. I don't believe him. And here's another one. Now, at work, I'm the life of the party. When I go home after work, I curl up in bed and I want to die. She was a CEO of a successful company, and with hard work, she's gotten things done. Now the company was listing, and her efforts didn't right the ship. When I inquired who she could ask for help, her answer was, admitting I need help is not an option, Pastor. If I have to ask for help, I will be seen as incompetent, and the board will fire me. Now, all of these people have a common denominator, don't they? They have a shame in them that really is a silent killer. Now, where do these testimonies come from? And that's why I thought, if I have the opportunity to speak with you, they come from childhood shaming practices in most cases. Either at home, of course, or exasperated or strengthened in school. Yet shaming is not just in childhood. Shaming happens also in our adulthood. I didn't expect to discover something about myself when I took up the study of this subject 3 years ago. And I discovered there's a lot of shame in me too. And that was not because of my childhood experience. I have had so much shame that I didn't realize it actually affected me. I started having allergies that I'd never had before, food allergies. In my gut, sometimes stress, affects your heart or other, but affects my gut, I guess, and I just was really having struggles physically. And as I am now away from the environment that shamed me so bad, and I'm sad to say that was my own denomination, I'm recovered. Yeah, I felt lack of confidence. I'd never had that before. I wanted to withdraw. I wanted to be away from people. Well, that's not me. That's the opposite of me. I felt emotionally gutted. So shame is big. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, that I struggle with shame. Shame is a hidden killer. but silent killer. Here's a quote from the book from Kurt Thompson. Shame is everywhere, and there's virtually nothing left untainted by it, from our family at home to the one at church, from the bedroom to the boardroom, from the school to work to play. It is the primal emotional pigment that colors the images of everything. Our bodies, our marriages, our politics, our success and failure, our friends and enemies, even how we view the God of the Bible. It starts and surprisingly ends wars, only to start them again. It fuels injustice, creates excuses for doing nothing, little, if anything, about it. And this last statement, it is a featured tool for motivating students, athletes, employees, and so on. Now that's where you come in, eh? Just look that sentence I highlighted on my notes. It is a featured tool for motivating students. Shame. And that's where I think it's for us good to have a little exploration on this subject today. Because shame is not only an emotional consequence of something others did to us. Yeah? If I'm working with an abuse victim, or I'm working with someone who's been violated in other different ways, that person is filled with shame by what others have done to him or her. Yeah, that's where I struggle with my toxic shame. Well, it's not because of my sins that I did. I mean, of course, I have biblical shame. We'll look at that difference in a moment. But toxic shame is when people do things to you that assault your integrity, your personality, that crosses your boundaries and leaves just this shame behind. Now, that's an emotional consequence, but I want you to notice that statement under C2. Shame is an emotional weapon Satan uses effectively. Yeah, he uses it to corrupt our relationship with God, obvious, but he also uses it to break us or to weaken us so that we are prevented from using God's gifts because of the toxicity of shame that binds, that disintegrates, that humiliates, that breaks down, that make you want to go in a shell. Now, people that live in a shell can be very beautiful people. Yeah? As I counsel a woman who was severely abused in her childhood, she lived basically in a shell of shame. And if God would not have blessed the gospel as well as the biblical counseling to her, she would still be there. Today, she's a brilliant, capable, functioning, flourishing personality. Though the scars of shame are always there, wanting to pop up again. Right? So this is what I mean. If Satan is using this weapon effectively to weaken and break us, then we as teachers really need to understand. There are the reasons for my workshop. We need to understand what shame is and what shaming does. Evaluate whether we use shaming methods. And obviously, thirdly, is that you adjust your methods in facing wrong behaviors to minister grace instead of shame while speaking the truth. So far, introduction. Let's go look at the second page. I give you 10 statements on shame. I could have made much more, but that's about as far as I wanted to go. Beautiful book by Edward Welch, Shame Interrupted. If you want to read another book on this for yourself, this is probably one I recommend. Really, really, very well done. He says, shame is a deep sense you are unacceptable because something you did, something done to you, or something you are associated with. You feel exposed and humiliated. So that's a short definition of shame. And these 10 statements, if you just quickly walk through those, shame is like having dung on your face about what you did, or more often about what others did to you. And that could be your parents, that could be your siblings, that could be your friends, that could be your teachers, that could be really anybody. So when you're shamed, you feel exposed and humiliated for not being good enough. Now, how many of us have that feeling? Okay, at least one is admitting. I always struggle with not being good enough. Yeah, I always struggle with, I need to do better. I'm an absolute perfectionist. And where does perfectionism come from? You may answer. Often. That's different than perfectionism. A perfectionist is never satisfied with what he's done. Yeah? I like beauty too and enjoy it. But a perfectionist always is striving to get beyond. Why? Because he's ashamed. I sent this outline back to Paul last night because I discovered 3 spelling mistakes. If you find them, you get a free coffee, okay? But that's my perfectionism. Silly me. Why would I worry about that? Yeah? Often it's shame. I don't want to be exposed. Yeah, shame is a big one. Shame is the sense you are a loser, you don't deserve to live. Let me see, any of those statements, I think you can read them yourself. But number 6 is also important. Shame also grows when nothing is said by the right person. As obviously you're not important, or you're not interesting, or you're treated as if you didn't exist. You're just totally ignored. And keep that one in mind, because you can shame students in your classroom by ignoring them. And we do that quick, don't we? Because he is such a quiet boy. He's not causing me any trouble. That one is constantly on my radar because... And what are we doing by ignoring that quiet one? We're giving him or her indirectly the message. Maybe you're not that important. Could be very shame-provoking. Shame is tenacious. It sticks even if proven not guilty. You know, when the judge tells you you're not guilty, but you were accused of that, you can feel not guilty and still feel the shame. That's what shame is. Just a few ideas about shame. It's also different than being embarrassed. When you're embarrassed, you blush, and then you laugh about it, and you walk away. When you're shamed, it becomes your identity. This is what you're going to define yourself by. So that's a big difference. For example, we've all done it, right? I've done it, and you've done it. Okay, guys, we're going to play soccer. Okay, you're captain. Go ahead and pick the team. How many of you have done that? Please don't ever do it again. Because what happens? Who's going to get picked first? And who's picked last? Oh, okay, you come on our team. Can you hear that? Oh, okay, you come on our team. That kid is shamed in public. He's not good at athletics. He gets the message, nobody really wants me. I'm just the last one on the team because, yeah, well, that's just the one. So picture that in yourself. And of course, if the team loses, who gets blamed? Or who feels the blame when the team loses? Yeah, of course, it's my fault because I'm just a lousy player. So please be aware of these little things that we do. Now, the rejected boy in his childhood may become a CEO at a big company. So you say, well, he's done well. He's very, very, very good. He is there. And guess what he gets to do now? He gets to do the picking and the choosing. And when you analyze that man, most likely you find a 10-year-old inside of him that's still struggling with shame, and he's overcoming it now by being the CEO. That's how shame works, on and on. So anyway, shame can also be good. Notice the last one. We are having good shame. Probably not enough of that. Talk about that in a moment. Now, number B, your time to talk. Can you come up with some words in our vocabulary of English that are related to shame? I have about 20 here. Inadequate. You can write them down for a moment. Just go look at the words that are related to shame in our language. One more? Pardon? I won't need to comment. You just keep giving them. Unconfident. Okay. Here comes my list then.
What new heresy do you have for us today?
Pardon?
What new heresy do you have for us today?
Okay, here's a whole bunch of them. Unclean, defiled, disgraced, dishonored, outcast, worthless, filthy, unlovable, loathed, shunned, discarded, disapproved, scorned, repulsive, weak, inferior, rejected, powerless, failure, worthless, no good, humiliated, contemptuous. Now, notice that's not all, okay? But there's a pile of words here that are all related to this shame thing. Why is that? Because shame has so many faces. Now, see, I'm still developing this, so you are my first guinea pig. But the subject of shame is intriguing me from out the Bible. Yeah, Bible cultures and the Bible itself majors on the paradigm of shame and honor. What does our Western culture major on? And you'll probably recognize it in your own teaching or perhaps in your own preaching. What do we mostly talk about? Guilt and forgiveness. And guess what? The Bible talks 10 more times about shame and honor than guilt and forgiveness. 10 more times. Now you say, yeah, but that's the biblical culture. Indeed, the Asian, the African culture today are still very much on the shame, honor. Yeah? You're Islam, Hindu, fellow Canadians. Don't think like us, white Westerners. They are still thinking shame and honor. We think forgiveness and guilt. Why? Because we Westerners are thinking individualistic, sadly. Whereas in the Bible culture and in the Asian African cultures, they always think community. Yeah? So this is an interesting perspective to realize. The scripture calls attention to the no shame of the pre-fall days. Isn't that interesting that nothing else is said about mankind? Nothing else except, of course, he's in the image of God, but there's no detail except one. Here it is. And they were both naked, and they were not ashamed. Holy Spirit noticed no shame. Now, they were not guiltless. They were also not guiltless. But there was no shame. Now, immediately after the fall, what happens? They sin. The woman ate, the man ate, they did eat together, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew they were what? Naked. They were feeling exposed. They're feeling uncomfortable. And so what they do? Hide. What are they hiding? What do you think they're hiding? Now, come on. Shame. They're hiding shame. They're not guilty. Of course they're guilty. Do they feel their guilt? Do they feel their guilt when God confronts them? Not a shred. Lord, the woman thou gave me. Lord, the serpent beguiled me. But they were ashamed, but not guilty. Even though they were guilty, they didn't feel the guilt. They didn't have any sense of guilt at that moment. They were hard-nosed about their wrong, but they were dreadfully ashamed. They were hiding, behind the covered fig leaves. They were running away from God as they heard the Lord come in the garden. So, man is overwhelmed with shame. They feel stripped of their dignity. They feel disgraced and degraded because of the sins they have done themselves. And their covering up was an attempt to say, yes, I am defective, but honor me still. Remember that young man who says, I'm rude and I am tough? What's he trying to say? Honor me. I'm a tough guy. You don't fool with me. But what is he doing? He's having fig leaves. Hide the shame that he feels inside. So in Scripture, you find indeed, as I said, shame more often than guilt. And you will notice it now after I tell you. Yeah? Nakedness, dishonor, defilement, much more. Notice so often this phrase. Psalm 31. Lord, in thee do I put my trust. Deliver me in thy righteousness. Let me not be put to shame. You'll find it everywhere. Shame is all over in the Bible. And the Bible authors, the poets, are always talking about not being ashamed. What is that? That is to be rejected as not being. Can you finish it? They're afraid to reject it because they're not being good enough. How many of you struggle with that? Even in relationship to God, we often think we're not good enough. No, we aren't. Of course we're not. We got to be ashamed about that. We can never measure up. And if we're trying to think to make ourselves good enough, you will always struggle with your sense of shame because you're not good enough. The more you see of God, the more you're going to learn how not good enough you are. The more you grow in grace, the more you grow in a sense of defilement. But that also brings so much beauty to the gospel because Jesus' other name is good enough. I love that word in the Dutch, satisfaction. Now I'll translate that, right? Satisfacere, two Latin words put together, means doing enough. Jesus' gospel work is satisfaction, doing enough. And the Dutch have translated literally, genoegdoening. See, he is for me my genoegdoening, my doing enough. That's where I flee with my shame. I know in the sight of God I'm accepted because of the doing enough he did and the doing enough he is. And that's the only cure for the shamed and the shame-based people. So, now, 4 would be a whole different topic. The journey of Jesus' life is steeped in shame from beginning to the end. You know, to be called Jesus of Nazareth, what do you think that meant in Jesus' days? That's a label of shame. You're from Galilee. You come out of Nazareth. That's a shame-based thing. Don't forget, for us it's an honor, or, it's identification. Jesus is constantly associated with shame. Guess what? He's born out of wedlock. When he's 33 years old in John 8, they say, you were born out of fornication. Stuck with him like the letter A in the scarlet letter on the woman. It stuck with Jesus. Shame. You were born out of wedlock. His whole life is associated with shame. He touched lepers. He ate with the outcast. He bothered with children and females. In the eyes of the religious Pharisee, that was shame. To let someone that is not your wife touch you. Or to even speak and teach a woman is shameful. This is Jesus. He lets himself be dragged. He's sold for a price of a slave. He's dragged before the jeering crowds. His beard is pulled out. He is spit on the face. Now, you try to do that to any Asian today, spit in his face, and you could be killed for that. That is so offensive. Hit on the cheek. Yeah, understand it out of the Greek culture. To be hit on your cheek and turn the other side doesn't mean you just get violent and just let it happen. That's not what Jesus means at all. Jesus says you can defend yourself, okay? But to be hit on the cheek is to be offended. It's to be shamed. Don't hit back, he says. Don't offend back. And finally, he is crucified. Now, we wear the cross, or people wear the cross. I don't think actually that the Christian religion is identified with the cross. It is with the resurrection. Right? But the cross for us is a symbol of glory. Guess what? In the Jewish eyes, in the Greek eyes, there was no more disgusting, humiliating, shameful thing than to hang on a cross. So Jesus ended his life in the greatest utterable shame and dishonor and infamy and disgust, only worthy for the worst criminals. I'm contemplating to preach on Sunday night on Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, listen to this, endured the cross, despising the shame of that cross. That's how I think how that is meant. And he despised it. That means he actually thought little of it. He let himself be covered with all the shame. You know, it's a strange story perhaps, but real quick. It was in 2000 that I moved to New Zealand, and right before I moved, we had a triple homicide in Kalamazoo, and 2 of them were members of my church in Kalamazoo. It's a horrible story. I had just been there a couple of days before to say goodbye to this old couple, and maybe 5 days later, they are horrifically murdered. Anyway, I did call the police because I had some strange suspicion, which probably proved to be totally wrong, gladly. But I did also tell them, I said, yes, I've been in the house just a couple of days before. So, long story, I moved to New Zealand, November, December, I get a letter from the FBI. I need to get my fingerprints taken to eliminate me from the suspect list, because they found fingerprints all over. They probably found mine too, but not on the murder weapon, maybe somewhere else. Now, can you imagine what I felt? I jumped in that car and I raced to Masterton as soon and quick as I could. I felt so ashamed to be suspected of being a murderer. Now understand the shame Jesus faced when all the sins of his people are imputed to him. And that's Gethsemane. When he sees the horribleness of being the sinner. And he took the shame. And he thought nothing of it. Beautiful, beautiful depth of the gospel. Now, question 5 is a question. Though the Asian cultures and the African cultures major on shaming, are we guilty of doing this in our own church and school communities? Now, when you in the Asian or the African culture fail your school, break your tradition, leave the faith, fall morally, you could be rejected, you'd be ostracized, or you would even be killed. Are we sometimes, as a church community, guilty of the same? The reason I asked that, 3 years ago, we did a survey in our school in New Zealand with students who have left 5 to 10 years ago from our school. And I was very interested to read these surveys, and they were devastating. Devastating. And one of the factors that came through, we felt often so shamed. Now, going back to those teachers of those 5-10 years ago, they probably had no clue what they were doing, right? They weren't nasty people. They weren't horrible. I mean, they may have not always had the best skills, but they weren't meant to shame them, but this is what came out. So that kind of fuels, again, my search for this whole thinking. And yeah, we need to be careful that we don't use shame in our own teaching. Yeah, Thompson called attention to the fact that sometimes shame is used as a tool to motivate students. Is it ever a legitimate tool? And the same can be asked for the threat of punishment, and the same can be asked about motivating students with big rewards. Are those ever biblical methods to change behavior? They're not, as I tried to bring out this morning. I've encountered shaming, attitude inconsistencies, dealing with sexual abuse, and with date rape. Date rape is forced sexual encounter during dating. And how do I encounter shaming? They tend to blame or to shame the victim. Yeah, shouldn't be doing that, shouldn't have dressed better, shouldn't have been there, were seductive. Now that's re-victimizing. That's not how God wants us to handle these kind of horrific things that are happening. And please, let's not do that also in our classroom. Let's don't do the big A like in the scarlet letter. But how do we shame? Well, sometimes a condescending glance, tone of your voice. People shame me when they give me the cold shoulder. I get quite a few of those. Because that makes me feel like I'm just a rotten apple, not even worth being noticed. That hurts. It shames, doesn't it? But a groaning sigh, oh, you again, that's shaming. That's not the Spirit of Christ. That's not the gentle, the meekness. Angry, cutting words, humiliating consequences. You know, when you stick that kid in the... What we used to do, right, or at least was done to me several times, go in the corner and there, that dot, you stick your nose to that and stand there for half an hour. Can you imagine standing there? All these kids are sniffling behind you. What's happening there in that corner? Nothing effective. Shaming. Just shredding this person. Now, shame and guilt are often close companions, but must not be confused. Guilt relates to justice. Guilty people are confronted with their wrongdoing and they face legal consequences. Yeah, guilt lives in the courtroom, where you've searched, you've sinned, you've done wrong, and the guilty expects a punishment and he needs forgiveness for restoration. That's the guilt factor. And guilt is often motivating people to repair the damage. You know, you feel guilty, you want to make it right, and it sometimes indeed, by God's grace, becomes a motivating factor. Shame relates not to justice, it relates to people. Shamed people feel horrible about themselves, about what they did, and that can be good, but mostly what others did to them, and that is not good. Shame lives in the community, which can feel like a courtroom. Yeah, because I'm a disgrace, I'm unacceptable, I failed everyone, I don't belong anymore because of what I did or what has been done to me. Why is it so often that the people that have been wronged feel they don't belong anymore? Now, that's probably not always to do with the setting in which they are at. But that's how they interpret the signals they get and twist them in a misinterpretation. So it's not always the fault of the setting, but we are today thinking about ourselves as the setting, and perhaps we need to look at ourselves. Are we also shaming? Like I said, shaming motivates people to hide. But then, how does this hiding happen? Now, this is an important point to see. Hiding happens in a lot of varieties. Very proud people can be very shameful people. Yeah, this is kind of a tough one to penetrate. But shame can hide behind pride and arrogance and bossiness and aggression. I've seen in leadership, also in leaders in our church, people that are so arrogant and so haughty. And I have now discovered that probably a lot of shame is being hidden behind that facade. But shame can also hide behind performance-driven life. I want to economically and intellectually, and I want to succeed. I'm driving myself nuts. For what? To counter the shame factor. Shame can be a drive for power and for status and for recognition. So again, people that are really, really fighting for positions. But shame can go the other way. Drug abuse, promiscuity, alcohol, rebellion, fighting aggressive, violence. All can be shame. That's why it is so important for us to look at this subject. Again, anger, in which I try to control someone else, is probably shame. I dealt with a man who's been, in my opinion, more or less a domestic abuser, controlling his wife and children in very unbiblical ways. And as I was trying to work with him to try to analyze him, I finally discovered this guy is filled with shame from his childhood days. Yeah, you wouldn't see that outside of him. But this is what fuels him to be the tough nut and make everybody bow to his wishes in the house he lives in. When you see him outside in church, he'll take your shirt off for you. So helpful, so nice, so kind, so good. Inside the house, different man. Some people that are also driven by shame are super strict religious. Yeah, very religious, want to do better, better, better. So here you got some insights on the whole thing of shame. Now the last statement, shame is only dealt with effectively in the context of loving, caring, nurturing, reassuring, accepting, unconditional connection or relationship with God and people. Yeah, the only way that shame can be really helped is when there are a relationship that is nurturing. Now you as a teacher could be one of those keys when you deal with a shamed youngster in your classroom. They may have no connection with their mom and dad. But what a blessing it could be if your classroom could become one of those places where she or he is being nurtured. Yeah, Genesis 3:8. See how God sought the shamed and the guilty? God did not enter paradise with a hammer, but with an invitation. Where are you? You know what that really means? I want to see you. You're hiding from me. I want to see you. Now, that brings me to our second half. And here we can maybe chat a little bit together as well. Oh, sorry. Second one is real short here. The differentiation between the three types of shame: biological, biblical, binding. Okay, biological, we all have that. I still feel ashamed today when I go golfing with my kids. Not miniature golfing, I can beat them on that. But the other golfing, when you have to go, young, I mean, I always hit the grass or the air, but never the ball. So I feel biological shame. Yeah, you know that feeling? Kids feel that too. I'm not quite as tall as Johnny. I'm shameful about that. Yeah, my hair is not quite as pretty as hers. Shame. That's biological shame. Every kid has that. We all have experienced that. Sometimes as adults we have that. That doesn't have to be damaging or debilitating. We usually grow out of it as we grow or as we learn. If I would go golfing every week, I probably would never have that feeling again. But that's not my way of filling my time. Biblical shame, very important to distinguish between biblical and the next one. I will call that healing shame. And the Bible also distinguishes between shame as self-caused, which is our sin, or other-caused. The shame that we experience when other people have done wrong. Think of Tamar, raped by Amnon. All her life, that woman is shamed by what happened. But that was not her sin, that was his sin. Yeah? Adam and Eve and others obviously are shamed about their sin. It's part of the conviction process where we feel shame. Yeah, that's important to have. And biblical shame about our sins can be healing when we are brought to the Lord Jesus Christ. I talked about that this morning. So that's an important shame, and may God give us more of that. There's really not enough of that either. But the one that we meet mostly is the binding shame or the toxic shame. That's unhealthy shame about what we feel we are through what others say or do or did. That's how I would define unhealthy shame. Healthy shame, my behavior is wrong. I need to take ownership. I need to repent of my sin and turn away from it and, of course, turn to God. That's healthy. Unhealthy shame, I'm a flop. I'm no good. I never will be good enough. And I allow it. I don't know what that statement meant, but I'm defined by my shame. No matter what I try, I will always be a no good person. Now, that's toxic shame. That's what I want to make you think about. Yeah, we want biblical shame, and we only get that when we use the gospel, when we focus on the astounding love of God to love such unlovable creatures. That will bring real shame as well as guilt. But this binding shame, we don't want that, because it can mar a child for the rest of his life. Now, I see that my dear friend has left me in a tangle here because I don't have my notes. You missed a few. Maybe I have to go back to my... So anyway, you're going to just get it off my top of my head. Huh? Otherwise, you have it on your computer, and then put your computer here. But let me start. Preventing toxic shaming in the classroom. I have just, been creatively thinking, and I have to give some credit to my dear wife, as we spent our Saturday afternoon driving in beautiful New Zealand, and I shared with her some of my thoughts, and says, well, give me some more. And she's getting some credit for this as well. Thank you, sir. Oh, you don't have a... Okay. We'll get there. Now, enable editing. There we go. Okay, I'm racing to the bottom here. It's about 75 pages to go. No, that's not true. Now, so here I would invite a little bit of discussion if we can. Mostly all causes of adult shame, mostly all of them are rooted in childhood. Yeah, there are other causes, but because of you as a teacher, I thought I'll limit myself just not only to childhood experience that lead to shame in adulthood. And instead of doing it in a negative way, what you should not be doing, I thought let's focus on the positive. And the first one is use responding instead of reacting in your interactions with the students. What's the difference? When you go to the doctor and you get medicine, and you come back the next time, and the doctor asks you, did you have a good response? No, I had a terrible reaction. Feel the difference? A reaction is negative. You don't want medicine to have reactions because allergies or whatever. You want to respond, which is assault or attack your illness. That's the difference between the responding and the reacting. Now, though reacting is at times needed, it is overused in our communications to children's, let's say, their behavior. We react with, it's kind of like a knee-jerk response, which alarms or belittles or hurts or shames. Like, let's have an example. We all had this, the kid spills the milk on the table. Give me an example of a reaction. And give me an example of responding. Give me an example of reaction. Pardon?
Why do you always do this?
Okay. Another reaction. What a mess you made, you clumsy clown. This is the third time you did this week. Now, what did I just do? I shamed the person. That's reacting. That's a That's a shame-based response. Now, responding would sound something like this, and of course we can always think of that now, not when the milk spills. But this is how we need to think, right? Oh no, you grab that towel quickly, we'll clean it up. Accidents like this happen. Now I'm responding in a positive way. I'm not degrading the child. We're dealing with the emergency. We're helping him to clean up. That's responding versus reacting. So maybe together think about your own interactions. Did I respond now or did I react? Did I include shaming, even about a thing that really is not a sin? I mean, spilling milk is not sin, right? Clumsy child? No, not a clumsy child. What's the right word? It's a child. They're not just always so coordinated yet. Right? And who of us has not done that even when we're older? And sometimes we reach for the potatoes and we end up knocking over the glass of milk. We didn't mean that, but we don't need a shameful response. So listen to your own responses, analyze them. And the text that I'm thinking of is this. Let's draw a blank here. Ephesians 4:29, help me guys. Here we go. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that it may be, let me read the whole verse now because I'm really messing up. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. Now, corrupt communication is not speaking about filthy jokes. When I just said, oh, you clumsy clown, can you never keep that glass of milk not falling over? That's corrupting communication. That didn't minister grace to that child. That ministered shame to the child. Yeah, so please let's be aware. What am I doing to communicate shame? Now, if it happens too many times, that's the only thing that happens. Obviously, it will eventually become the child. And that's the second one. Focus on the actions instead of on the persons. The you are statements always, eventually, if you hear them long enough, become the I am beliefs. Yeah, if our child hears put-downs, and they hear rejections, and they hear, oh, you are such a slowpoke, and we say that long enough, he is going to say, I am a slowpoke. And I am now always going to be a slowpoke. Or you are just so, whatever. You repeat that long enough, it will turn in the mind as an I am statement. And if it's a shameful thing, if it's a negative thing, it becomes shame-based thinking. They don't think they're good enough, they're going to finally believe it. And of course, some of our children are meeting that at home. Oh, you, man. I wish you weren't born. You think people ever say that to their kids? No, they do. I've heard it from kids' mouth. I was a mistake. Growing up with that, I am a mistake then, right? I am not worthy to be here. Now that person as an adult is still thinking he's just a mistake. He doesn't belong here. So please remember, focus on the actions, not on the person. Yeah, think about what did you do? How can we change this? How does it need to be changed? Rather than driving this shame home. Number C, this is one of the hardest one for me. I always see when the shoes are not in the cupboard. When I come home and David, my son, he has shoes everywhere in the what do you call that? The entry of the house. It's a beautiful cupboard I made with 7 shelves. He has plenty of room because he's the only kid left. But he still manages to put 3 pairs of shoes out there. And I always notice those, but I never notice when they're not there. So in other words, when I come inside, hey, David, I see 3 pairs of shoes again in the mudroom, and I just about broke my neck. I didn't. But I do not say, hey, David, wonderful. I saw your shoes are actually all on the shelf tonight. Now, how much are you like that? I challenged my teachers in Carterton. He says, instead of using a red pen, how about this year use a green one? Mark everything that's good. Only what is good. Don't mark what's wrong. You'll see a transformation when your kid gets that green paper back, even if there's only 5 green out of the 10 problems. Think about it once and try it once. It's just this half full instead of just half empty. Complimenting is so biblical. If you read Paul's epistles, he uses the sandwich approach. He starts with a compliment, he starts with thanksgiving, he starts with noting the positives, and then he gets to all the heart of the problems, and he ends with the positive mostly. Yeah, that's biblical. Let's encourage our children. Let's compliment them. When Allison came home with a score of a 92, guess what her mother asked? What happened to the other 8%? Have you ever asked that? Or something like that? Now, Allison will conclude, okay, I simply didn't work hard enough. What a shame on me. And Allison will tell herself, I need to work harder to get 100% because then Mom only will be happy. But, to be honest, Allison has worked so hard to get the 92. This was actually quite an accomplishment. But still, she gets to hear a shameful response. So eventually, Allison is going to believe, I don't work hard enough. What a failure I am, even though she has a 92. Isn't that funny? How people that are on the honor roll still struggle with shame. Because there are people in their lives that often are focusing on what's missing rather than what's good. Now, we do that too. I'm challenged by this subject to think about my own preaching. And I'm asking myself, am I encouraging enough? Or am I always pointing my finger at everything is wrong with us? Or are we celebrating the little, perhaps small, but beautiful, good things that God is doing? Yeah? So I'm learning, and myself also thinking, friends, just with you as a teacher. So major on that. Constant criticism is completely debilitating and also not encouraging. And I feel that as a pastor. Okay, and I'm an adult, so I should handle that. But when you always criticize, and you always meet with rejection, or you always feel disapproval, or you always feel it's not good enough, and when you come back from a sermon, not my own consistory, but then you hear, well, there was something missing this morning, Pastor. That makes me feel ashamed. Instead of hearing, wow, this was very valuable. That was some really good point. Now, also, in our own church community, always focus on what's missing rather than what there is not missing. Yeah, please, let's think about that. In our children, yeah, maybe that writing assignment, there's a lot of punctuation mark missing. Red. But there's beautiful words. Wow, you chose that word, so beautiful. And that word is, what an awesome way to end that sentence. The green. Now we're motivating, not shaming. Or at least giving the sense of not good enough. And of course it's not good enough, because there's still a lot that needs to learn, but we do it in a positive way. Stephen is an example of, oh man, I don't like this. I'm so glad I have a laptop that can my finger on this screen, but this is really hard. Shame people will, again, shame more people. Yeah, please keep it in mind. We're only making things worse. Stephen was very diligent. He excelled at work, yet he neglected his family. This is a case that I was dealing with. Finally, he admitted he was energized by his inner fear not to be found out wrong, because that was ingrained in his mind. Always fighting not to be wrong. And why? He recalled, he says, the family dinner conversations became his father's opportunity to criticize his ideas, to oppose his thoughts, to fight his choices, all the while in the name of making sure, this is what his father said, that Stephen's thinking would be sound. But he didn't make his boy sound at all. He made his boy feel, I'm always wrong, so I always have to prove my dad right. Now, what is that? That's shame. So let appropriate acknowledgement be public. But let correction be private, unless it concerns the whole group. You notice Jesus this morning in the passage rebuked the disciples in the whole group because all of them had to be rebuked. But he took Peter first, private, after he fell. And then later he reinstated him in his office in public. But he didn't berate Peter in front of the other disciples. You need to learn from that. Even if the child is wrong and needs a correction, remind yourself that if I do it in front of the whole classroom, I will be ineffective. I will shame them. They feel everybody's looking at them. And they need to be really careful. I'm working with that with someone that is in Carterton that just is loving to shame their students, and it is so painful to have that done in public. Watch your wordless conversations. Yeah, the 93-7. 93% of our communication is how we say, not what we say. So do I add a frown? Do I add a sigh? Am I have an irritated voice when I confront mistakes or underperformance or falling behind? So communication, dear friends, needs to be gracious and upbuilding. Think of that verse again, that no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is upbuilding. Upbuilding. And what is that? You're special to me. You are worthy to be treated with respect, even though you made a mistake or even though you sinned. Respect doesn't only go from child to teacher. Respect also goes from teacher to child. They go both ways. And I need to be careful when I say, oh, what a pain you are. You're a disgrace to the entire classroom and the school and your family. Man, I only wish you would be like your brother or sister way back in those years gone by. Well, that's just about unclothing the child in front of everybody. Don't make those comparisons. That is so unhelpful and shame-based. Yeah, when Jesus corrected his disciples this morning in Mark 10, he established what they were not doing, yet he didn't berate them. He didn't say, now how many times do I have to tell you people not to do this anymore? Didn't do that. Don't you get it? No, he focused on their wrongdoing, and instead of shaming their persons, he hopefully did bring biblical shame about their behavior. Lastly, or not lastly, but to focus on questions. Focus on statements instead of questions. Like, why did you not do your homework again? Now, what happens here when you do that? You're standing here and the kid is there. Why didn't you do your homework again? You are obviously in a place of authority and you are giving the child the feeling of that. Is that effective? Imagine what would happen if you would approach that child and say, you know what, it must be tough for you not to have completed your homework again because you're falling behind every time more and more. What can we do about this together? Now I took the shame out of it, even though I addressed the problem. Now this is not a question, this is a statement that leads to a question. And it leads to relationship, because I'm building a relationship with this kid. You know, this must be tough. So notice, I'm not standing here looking there. I'm going to sit next to him for a moment and say, let's just have a little chat. Oh, time is up. Yeah. So, I got no more time. Guys, I hope I've given you a little bit of a warm-up on this whole subject. So you look at the other last ones, the statements of relationship building. I do want to say something about number 8. Help a child accept the consequence instead of imposing them. That was one of my strategies at home. Instead of telling, okay, you are going to get this punishment, I said, no, look, we're dealing with this problem, and Mom and I decided that this is a good consequence. Are you willing to accept that consequence? Oh, no, I'm not. Okay, that's fine. What we're going to do then, I'll let you sit here for a little longer, okay? So I'll come back in half an hour. You can think about it. I never made my child, I never imposed on my older children. I'm not talking about 2, 3-year-olds, okay? I'm talking about my child and teenagers. I never made them be forced in a consequence because it's useless. But if they have accepted the consequence, says, yes, Dad, I accept it. You build relationship. Hey, thank you for this.
Pastor, apologies for the notes.
Yeah, see, I couldn't get finished because of your fault, eh? So what I just do?
Shame on me.
This is a bad example.
We are expected in the gym for lunch.
Okay. Well then, have questions,